Thank you.
Amen. Listen, today is one of my 3 favorite Sundays to preach other than Easter and Christmas. I love Veterans Day, I love 4th of July, and I absolutely love Memorial Day. Today we have a special guest with us. His name is Timothy Merklinger. I was only ever allowed to call him Sergeant Merklinger. He was a drill instructor when I went to boot camp in 1990 with the Marine Corps. He was a guy that we were his first platoon after he finished DI school, so we trained him on everything that he needed to know for his next few platoons, and he would argue that all day long. He is standing at the back of the room. You will not see much of him, but you will hear from him later. Here's what I want to encourage you to do. Don't ask him any stories about me. We were together 13 weeks, and he knows more than he should, and a lot of it is his fault, so we'll just leave it at that. We used to sing this chant, if you will, when we were running in the Marine Corps. We would do it for a couple reasons. They always said it was to keep us in step, but when you're on like mile 20, there's no staying in step. You're just trying to survive. The other reason is so you would open up your lungs and your breathing capacity would be greater. But the chant went a little something like this: Mama, mama, can't you see what the Marine Corps has done for me? It took a boy and made a man, taught him, oh yeah, yes he can. Sergeant Merklinger was that guy in my life. He took a boy that was 19 coming into the Marine Corps, and in 13 weeks, him and a couple other drill instructors and our senior drill instructor took 80-some guys and took them from being boys to being men. And so I'm appreciative of him being here. He is retired now. Was a master sergeant in the Marine Corps. When he wasn't on the drill field, was part of the Marine Corps Drum and Bugle Corps, and you'll understand that more in just a minute. But today I want to talk to you a little bit about the DNA of a hero here on Memorial's Day. Former Admiral William H. McRaven served as the 9th Commander of Special Operations Command, or what we call SOCOM. Admiral McRaven was a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin, and upon graduating was commissioned in the United States Navy. After his commissioning, he went to BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition and SEAL Training, and upon graduating in that was stationed and put with the elite SEAL Team 6. After becoming the 9th Commander of the United States Operations Command, Admiral McRaven organized and oversaw the execution of Operation Neptune Spear. Many of you may not know what that is, but Operation Neptune Spear was the operation that killed Osama bin Laden on May 2nd, 2011. Admiral McRaven was also the guy that was over Special Operations Command when they rescued Captain Phillips off the Maersk, if you remember the movie Captain Phillips. Admiral McRaven is a #1 New York Times best-selling author. He wrote books such as Make Your Bed. If you watch any social media, you would have saw him giving a commencement address to a college class when he said the #1 thing you can do to be successful is learn to make your bed every morning. He also wrote the book Sea Stories and the Hero Code. In his book Hero Code, Admiral McRaven recounts a time when he was in Afghanistan and President Obama was flying in to meet with the Afghan president. Admiral McRaven was over all the operations there in Afghanistan, and so when the president landed, the air was too bad, the visibility was too bad for him to fly from the Bagram Air Base to Kabul. And so since he was going to be grounded and they wouldn't let the POTUS travel, he requested a meeting with Admiral McRaven to learn about the operations going on in Afghanistan. Admiral McRaven knew that he had to be dressed in his uniform. He was at the gym enjoying a workout after the stand down. A non-commissioned officer got him and said, "Sir, the president would like to see you now." We know that in the Marine Corps, 20 minutes really only means about 7 minutes. I can remember many times that Sergeant Merklinger would be in our platoon, and he'd say, "All right, recruits, you got 10 to do this." And he would start 10, 9, 8, 2, 1. Y'all notice the numbers I missed, right? So I learned to do that with my girls before I give them a spanking. I go, "You got 10, 9, 8, 2, 1. Now, my wife would argue that I would count to 100 and still wouldn't spank them, and it's possible that she is correct. The Admiral jumped back out of his PT gear into his uniform and took off to the air base. The president wanted to be briefed in 20 minutes. He got there with time to spare, and as he got to the gate, he was in a 3-car entourage. In the first car was a sergeant in the Army that was his security officer. He jumps out. He approaches the lady at the gate, which was an airman who was a security guard, and he told her that Admiral McRaven was in the rear car and needed to brief the president. She looked and said, "You don't have authorization to enter, and until I have authorization for you to enter, it is a no-go." The sergeant left mad. He went back to the admiral's car, and he told Admiral McRaven, he said, the Air Force security guard is not going to let us go through. Well, the highest enlisted guy in Afghanistan at the time was a command sergeant major. He looked at the admiral and said, I got this. He jumped out of the car. He goes to the booth where the young airman is standing, and he says, I don't know if you realize this, but I have Admiral McRaven in the car, and he is to brief the president, and you're going to let us through. She looked him dead in his eyes and said, I am not going to do that. The command sergeant major went back to the admiral's car, and he said, sir, she is not going to let us through. So Admiral McRaven did what any good admiral would do. He got out of the car. He went up to where she was standing, and he says, listen here, airman, I appreciate you doing your job, but you're going to let me through because I got to brief the president, and I will not be late. She said, no, sir, I cannot do that. He said, do I look like a Taliban terrorist? I have 3 stars sitting here on my collar. She said, no, sir, you don't, but I have a job to do. As Admiral McRaven was sitting there trying to figure out how he was going to negotiate with her, she got clearance to let him through. After an hour of briefing the president, they were coming back through the gate, and Admiral McRaven asked the car to be stopped. He got out, he went to the young airman, and in a very loud voice, he said, do you know that I was 10 minutes late briefing the President of the United States, and it's your fault? She looked down, she said, yes, sir, I do. And as she looked down and said, yes, sir, I do, Admiral McRaven reached into his pocket and pulled out his command challenge coin, which was reserved for only those that do exceptionally well in what they're supposed to do. He placed it in her hand, and as he placed it in her hand, he said, you did exactly what you were supposed to do. You can come serve with me anytime you like. She looked down at the coin, she looked back up at him and said, sir, I was only doing my duty. Church, if you don't understand what's going on, many people in the military do that. We are called to a duty. If you sign up in the military, if you enlist in the military, there's a duty. Matter of fact, we are driven by 2 things when we enlist in the military. We are driven by the general orders. Our first general order is to take charge of my post and all government property in view. Chances are that if you served in the military before I even finished that, you finished it for me. The second thing is we take an oath of enlistment that says, I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over me, according to regulations and the Uniform Code of Military Justice, so help me God. There's this expectation that every member of the military will not just be a hearer of the general orders, will not just be a hearer of the oath that they take, but that they will be a doer of it. James 1:22 says, but be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourself. See, this is the base of everything that we do as a believer. If you only read God's word, but you don't do God's word, then you and I are only half the believer that we should be and that God intends us to be. So what's the code? What is the code or the DNA of every hero that has been known from Genesis 1 to now? If you're a male in this room between the age of 0 and 100, and I'm assuming looking around we don't have anybody 100, and I don't hear any crying, so I'm assuming we don't have 0. But everybody falls in there somewhere. If you're a male 0 to 100, I want you to stand. Right where you're at, just stand. And as Merklinger would say, take your time, hurry up. Now I want you to look to the person to your right or to your left. You probably came with them. And I want you to ask them this question. Am I a hero? Go ahead, take your time. Ask them, am I a hero? Once you have your answer, you can go ahead and sit back down. Now I will tell you in this service, I heard a lot less women laughing about that question than I heard in the last 2. So maybe this is going to go better than I thought. Admiral McRaven writes in his book, Hero Code, the qualities of a hero when it comes to our military. And I believe after reading the book and reading God's word that those same qualities exist in the church as well. And those qualities are this: courage, humility, sacrifice, integrity, compassion, perseverance, duty, hope. He writes humor, and in our book, it's joy. He writes forgiveness, and in our book, it's mercy. Winston Churchill once said, courage is rightly esteemed the first of human qualities because it is the quality which guarantees all the rest. We see courage all throughout Scripture, but no better place do we see it on display than in the book of Joshua. If you have your Bible, your electronic device, your phone, or your stone tablet, if you want to turn to Joshua chapter 1. It says this in Joshua chapter 1, verse 1. Now it came about after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, that the Lord spoke to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' servant, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, cross the Jordan, you and all this people, to the land which I am giving to them, to the sons of Israel. Every place on which the sole of your foot treads I have given to you, just as I spoke to Moses. From the wilderness into this Lebanon, even as far as the great river, the river Euphrates. All the land of the Hittites and as far as the great sea toward the setting of the sun will be your territory. No man will be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you. I will not fail you or forsake you. Then he goes on to say in verse 6, be strong and courageous, for you shall give this possessions of the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous. Be careful to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, so that you may have success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not tremble or be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Courage for a believer comes from knowing that God, the one who placed the stars in the heaven, who numbered the hairs on your head. And I know some of you in this room are still salty about that. Okay. He's the one who has breath in his life, has life in his breath, and holds death in his hands. He says, I am with you. That should be what gives us courage. But if that's not enough, he goes on and says the second thing is that we should be strong and courageous. See, I believe you can be strong but not have courage. I believe you can get in the weight room, you can work every muscle you can have, you can be bulging in every part of your body, you can flex and rip your jacket. You can be that person that's on the sign at Gold's Gym. Y'all know the one I'm talking about, right? You can be that person but not have courage. But I do not believe that you can have courage without having strength. See, courage and strength go together like mac and cheese. Do I have any mac and cheese lovers in here? Can I get an amen? Cracker Barrel has good mac and cheese. And then if you get it with the biscuit and that country fried steak with the white gravy on it, I'm messing y'all up before lunch, aren't I? They go together. It's just what it is. But our strength doesn't come in muscle. It comes in mind. Our mind is where we draw upon confidence. Hebrews 10:35 says this, therefore do not throw away your confidence, which has a great reward. For you have need of endurance so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what is promised. There was a young lieutenant serving in Kandahar, Afghanistan, alongside Army Rangers. This young lieutenant was going through a Taliban community. As she was going through that, one of the two Army Rangers or herself stepped on a pressure plate mine. Immediately when that mine went off, the two Army Rangers were killed and the lieutenant was severely wounded, to the point that they had to medevac her to the rear, and she died later of her wounds. Lieutenant White was the first member of the cultural support team, a team that female soldiers would go out and interact with the women of Afghanistan, because they realized in the military that the women had great intel about what the men were out doing, about what was going on in their communities, about where the weapons were at. And so General McRaven put together this cultural support team. He was sitting in a command center in Tampa Bay, Florida, and as he was sitting there, he was getting a briefing of what happened that night within the theater of war in Afghanistan and Iraq. The last thing that they would do in this room of 100 people, as he was the head guy in the room, is they would ask for what casualties occurred. They went through a list of about 8 casualties, and when they got to the last one, the lieutenant that was briefing dropped his head The admiral looked at the lieutenant and said, what? Go ahead and give it to me. And he said, Lieutenant Ashley White, KIA, Afghanistan. The admiral was beside himself because the admiral enlisted her to be that person as the very first person in the cultural support team. Lieutenant White, though, she had courage. She had courage because of her training, and she had courage because of who she was with. You and I should have courage because of the confidence that we have in Christ and because of who he is. Yet so many times the church walks around with little courage. We don't have the courage to share. We don't have the courage to do. We don't have the courage to be. One, because we don't realize who Christ is in our life, and we don't realize that he is always with us. Church, if you want to have the DNA of a hero, you must have courage. The second quality is humility. Humility is defined as a modest or low view of one's own importance. Jesus, sitting at a dinner party one day as the guests were jockeying for who would be the top dog at the position, found it to be a great place to have a teaching moment. And so during this teaching moment, he decided to tell a parable. And we find this parable in Luke chapter 14, and in verse 11, he says this, "For anyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted." I like to think of it in simple terms for my simple mind. And what he was saying is this: if you think of yourself as some big guy, you're going to get broken down. But if you think of yourself as just a nobody, God is going to lift you up. Humility is a quality of a hero. Admiral McRaven was sitting at a dinner table with Dr. Kenneth Cooper. Some of y'all may have heard of him. He was a famed cardiologist that dealt with exercise and how to strengthen the heart and cardiac rehab and that sort of thing. Dr. Cooper was at this dinner and with his wife, and he had invited a couple people to come join him. One of those persons was Roger Staubach, a Hall of Fame quarterback for who? And the last time he played with them was the last time they had a winning season. Just saying, find another team. Roger Staubach was there with his wife, and then there was a gentleman there by the name of Charlie and his wife Dottie. Now, the admiral had no clue who anybody really was in the room. He had some kind of idea there was going to be this guy Charlie and Dottie, and that Roger Staubach was going to be there, and that's who he really wanted to sit with. So when they went upstairs to dinner, he tried to get next to him, but the cardiologist, Dr. Cooper, filled his way in there and wanted to have these conversations with Staubach. So as he was sitting there with dinner with this guy named Charlie, he began to ask Charlie questions, and he found out that Charlie was a retired Air Force pilot. And so he said, well, Charlie, what did you fly? And Charlie said, well, I flew a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Now, if you've served in the military, you know that when a pilot says, well, I flew a little bit of this and I flew a little bit of that, it means one of two things. One, they were really, really good, and they just let them fly everything that was in the arsenal. Or two, they were really, really bad, and they were actually trying to find something they could fly. Charlie began to ask the admiral questions about his family, about his life, about his command, about his time with SOCOM, about his children and what his children did, and about his wife and what his wife did, and what did they like to do together, and how special were they. The admiral says that when he got ready to leave the dinner, he felt so close to Charlie because Charlie cared so much about who he was and what he was. Not the fact that he was a three-star admiral, not the fact that he was over SOCOM, not the fact that he had done all these great things, but that he wanted to know who he was as a person. They started down the stairs from this dining room to the foyer, and Roger Staubach pulls up beside the admiral. And he said, man, what was that like? And the admiral said, what do you mean, what was that? What was that like talking to Charlie? The admiral said, well, I didn't even get his last name. I mean, what's the big deal about Charlie? He's like, you don't know Charlie? Charlie Duke. He was the youngest and the 10th person to ever walk on the moon. He's a national hero. Admiral said he felt about that big. Humility is when you are a national hero, yet nobody knows it. Humility is when you see yourself lower than anybody else. Not because you are, but that's because of what you do. It is said that the power of humility is that it brings us closer together. That the role of every hero is to unite people, not to divide them. We live in a world today where everybody is divided. There's left, there's right, there's black, there's white, there's gay, there's straight. There's all these differences in America where we're divided. We're divided by our neighborhoods. We're divided by our schools. We're divided by our churches. We're divided, yet it says the power of humility is that it brings us closer together, that the role of every hero should be to be a uniter. Church, will we be humble enough to unite people? The third quality is sacrifice. Author James Allen once said, "He who would accomplish little must sacrifice little. He who would achieve much must sacrifice much. And he who would attain highly must sacrifice greatly." Many of you may know the story of Marine Lieutenant Cleve McClary. He's a Charleston native. He was in Vietnam atop Hill 146 in the Quan Duc Valley. Him and a 15-man reconnaissance team. They were to set atop of this hill that they knew would be a strategic point against the North Vietnamese. They had been there for a couple of days. The North Vietnamese had been scouting them out and knew the importance of it too. After a couple of days of being there, the North Vietnamese began to advance on them with small arm fire, rocket fire, mortar fire. One night during the middle of the night, a grenade came in. Now I know this because Sergeant Merklinger put this in my DNA when I went through boot camp. A fragmentation grenade has a killing radius of 5 meters and a casualty radius of 15 meters. When that grenade landed atop of that hill, Cleve McClary was in that 15-meter radius. He sustained injuries by losing an arm, losing an eye, and multiple other surgeries that took him out of commission of being a Marine. Yet, Cleve McClary dedicated his life to telling the story of PFC Ralph Johnson. In the Marine Corps, the thing I love most about it is we don't see color. In the Marine Corps, you're either dark green or you're light green, but you're always green. PFC Ralph Norman was a dark green Marine from Charleston who received the Congressional Medal of Honor after he died jumping on that hand grenade. Romans 5:8 says, "But God demonstrated his own love towards us, and that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us." See, in the church, we can't talk about the quality or the code of sacrifice without talking about Jesus Christ. Because Jesus Christ became the bridge, not for what he did, but for what you and I did that separated us from the Father. He's the one that crawled up on the cross and said, "Father, there's not another way for them to get from here to you, so I'll make a way." So we can't talk about sacrifice without talking about Christ. John 15:13 says this, "Greater love has no one than this, that someone laid down his life for his friends." However, sacrifice is so much more than just about our bodies. It's about our time. It's about our resources. It's about the things that we can give back to the kingdom because he gave to us. In your seat when you walked in this morning was a piece of paper, and on that piece of paper are opportunities for you and I to serve. Who's going to do that if not you? One of the qualities of sacrifice is saying, you know what, I don't have a lot of time in a week, but I'll carve out this to do that. Luke 9:23 says, "If anyone would come after me, if your desire is to chase after Christ, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily." President Dwight D. Eisenhower once said, "The supreme quality of leadership is unquestionably integrity. Without it, no real success is possible, no matter whether it's in a station gang or a section gang." I don't even know what a section gang is. Anybody know what a section gang is? Is that an older term than what I am? A section gang, a football field, I know about a football field, in an army or in an office. See, integrity is the next quality of a DNA hero. Matter of fact, as General McRaven was serving as a young officer, he was serving at the Pentagon, and he was serving under Captain Ted Grabowski. Ted Grabowski had a golden rule, if you will, that if you were going to serve with him, whether in the Pentagon or on board a ship, and this was his golden rule: you must never lie or misrepresent the truth. If you do, you will get caught, and then you are no value to me anymore. No one will trust you, and without trust, none of your work can get done. Church, if we don't have integrity, then if they can't believe what we're saying, how are they ever going to believe the gospel that we're trying to share? Several years back, I was the chaplain for Ashbrook High School's football team in Gastonia for 9 years. We were traveling to a game that we desperately needed to win up above Lenore. If you don't know anything about North Carolina and Lenore, when you get above Hickory, there's nothing but a bunch of country-fed big boys, and they all play football. We started that game. It was the Friday after Labor Day. When we got up there, we got off the bus. I was the chaplain. I'm standing behind the team. The coach has everybody gathered around the end zone, and he said, guys, this is going to be an extremely difficult game today. Everybody was like, oh, coach, we got this. We're going to win. We're going to kill them. And he said, I need you to learn something today. He said, at the end of my life, I only have two things, my faith and my integrity. And he said, today you're going to learn what integrity is. We had two stud linebackers on our football team. Zeke Biggers went on to play for Eastern Carolina, linebacker, and then was a walk-on for the Charlotte Panthers. Norkeithius Otis played outside linebacker, then got moved to inside linebacker for the University of North Carolina Tar Heels. Both of them had missed practice on that Labor Day Monday. He looked at the team and he said, today you're going to have to win without these two guys. I'm sitting behind them going, oh, Lord, we're never going to win. Where do I start praying at? The players were looking at each other all confused, and one of them spoke up and said, Coach, we can't win this game without the two of them. He said, well, you're going to have to, because when it's all over with, all I have left is my integrity. And you're going to learn what that means today. I stood in the back and I prayed and I prayed and I prayed and I recounted scripture and I read David and Goliath in my head, and I just knew, man, we were going to win this game. We're going to come out victorious because we're doing the right thing. Coach has got integrity and we're learning today. We got it handed to us. But those students learned a very valuable lesson that day. Psalm 41:11 through 12 says, I know that you are pleased with me, for my enemy does not triumph over me. Because of my integrity, you uphold me and set me in your presence forever. We see these words ring true in a believer as well as Ananias. Pastor Steve preached about this the other week in Acts chapter 5. Him and his wife sell a piece of property. They go in to give the money. They misrepresent what they sold the property for, and immediately they drop dead. Church, if they can't believe what we say, then they're not going to believe what we say. He ends the chapter, Admiral McRaven, by saying this: never fear the path that is rocky, that is steep, and that is treacherous. There you will find men and women of integrity. There you will find heroes. The next two qualities we see of a hero are compassion and perseverance. We see this all throughout New Scripture with compassion with Christ, as he had compassion on the woman who had been bleeding for years, as he had compassion on the woman who was caught in the act of adultery. He could have easily condemned them, but no, he showed compassion. And for us to be considered a biblical hero, we must do the same. We see this in perseverance with the disciples, as after Christ ascends to the Father and they're being persecuted and hounded for everything they do for sharing the gospel, yet they kept doing it even to the point of death. We have to learn to put those two in practice. The next quality or the DNA of a hero that we see is duty. As a believer, we each have a duty, and we see this in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verses 13 to 14. It says, the end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Church, we have a duty. Over the last 3 to 6 months, we've been hearing this term, woke. About being a woke culture, about being woke on race, being woke on sexuality, about being woke on different things. I'm going to tell you today, if the church doesn't get woke on Christ, we're going to be in trouble. Too many of us are sleeping when we should be awake and telling. We keep this faith to ourselves. We went on a vacation this past week. I'm not wearing makeup for TV. I actually have a tan. That doesn't happen much. The guy found out I was a pastor that was captaining our ship. So he began to ask me questions. He's like, I'm a good old Catholic boy. I knew what that meant. He's Catholic, but he doesn't go. So I started asking him questions. He's like, well, to me, faith is all private. Now, he wanted to know everything about mine. He wanted to know the things that I agreed with, that he agrees with, that I didn't agree with. But for him, it was private. See, we've gotten to this point in America where our faith has become this internal thing. Yet we don't see that in Scripture. Faith is never internal. It is always external. We need to be sharing. We know his commandments, don't we? Do not be conformed to this world. If we had to grade the church today, what grade would you give them? Love your neighbor as yourself. Man, we come in here and sing about love and Christ's love and all this, and we go home, we don't even talk to our neighbor because we don't like them. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. Yet so many times we love so many other things so much more. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Man, we're chasing after so many other things, aren't we? When it comes to duty, the DNA code should read this: whatever job I'm given, whatever duty I'm bound by, I will do it to the best of my ability. Hope. Webster defines hope as a feeling of expectation and desire for a certain thing to happen. Isaiah 40 verse 31 says, yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not become weary. In 1970, there was an Army Special Forces unit known as the Green Berets. The Green Berets planned and conducted a rescue operation in northern Vietnam. The mission was to free POWs from located at a camp called Sun Tay. The Green Berets, they did all their reconnaissance, they did all their intel gathering. They thought they knew where these guys were at. They learned over their intel gathering that these guys had just been brutally tortured day after day after day as POWs. As they gathered their intel and landed in their helicopter of where they thought the location was, it resulted in 42 enemy combatants being killed and no POWs because they had been moved. The Green Berets thought their mission was a complete failure. 2 years later, the POWs were released, and in 1973, billionaire Ross Perot hosted a POW and the Sun Tay Raiders for a reunion in San Francisco. As the conversation went on through the afternoon, the Green Berets learned that their mission was not a complete failure. The POWs began to speak about learning of the mission and realizing that they had not been forgotten. One POW said this, quote, the Raiders gave us hope, and from that day on, we knew we could endure whatever trials came our way. Church, Jesus Christ gives us that kind of hope. No matter whether it's in the valley or no matter whether it's in the mountaintop. Because of him, we can have hope. Hebrews 10:23 says, let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. The next characteristic in the DNA of a hero is joy. I believe that all believers won't always be happy, but that they can always have joy. One of my favorite phrases that I love saying is somebody will ask me, how was your weekend? How was your day? I say, man, it was a great day. Just some can be better. You got to have hope, and then you got to have joy. Psalm 16:11 says this, you make known to me the path of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand. A couple weeks ago, myself and some of the college students got to go to Fort Pierce, Florida to do a mission trip. Our goal was to paint some houses, so we painted, but then we got together on a Sunday afternoon because we got there on Thursday and said, let's go feed the homeless. Man, we had seen them downtown as we were transitioning across Highway 1. So we went to Walmart. We bought things like honey buns, number one thing to put in a homeless bag if I'm homeless. Beanie Weenies, you can eat those cold. I've done it many times. We talked about non-perishable food, so they put in Vienna sausages. Even the homeless don't like those. We put in peanut butter crackers because peanut butter sustains, right? We went downtown right beside Adrian Rogers' First Church there in Fort Pierce. We handed out bags to about 4 or 5 homeless guys. We began to ask them, hey, do you know where there's any more homeless at? Homeless always know where the homeless are. So they're like, sure, go over by the marina. You'll find some there underneath the big tree. They were absolutely right. We got in the church bus. We drove over there. As we got in the parking lot, 3 cops pulled in and arrested a guy. I was like, we're leaving. We ended up getting out after they took care of their business, arresting the guy to the very place we were going to hand out food. And I asked the cop, I'm like, hey, we're here handing out food. Is that okay? He's like, well, now that this one's gone, it is. I was like, perfect timing. We handed out food. We spoke to the homeless there. We got back in the bus and we were leaving. As we were leaving to go back to where we were staying before we got to Highway 1, we transitioned this area that's a lot like downtown Rock Hill. Little stores, cafes, coffee shops on the corner. People were hanging out on the sidewalk. And so as we're sitting there at a stoplight, this guy on the sidewalk, you know how those guys, you see them out of your eyes, but you pretend you don't, right? I see him on the sidewalk, and I'm like, okay, that guy's over there. He starts walking to the van. Because the bus doesn't have automatic windows. We need to work on that. I roll the window down. I look over, and I say, hey, how you doing? He's like, hey, can I get a ride to Oleander Street? I said, in Wilmington? Because that's where Oleander is that I know. He's like, no, it's like 1.5 miles away. I'm like, I'm going to have to check with the insurance on that. I'll get back to you. I roll the window up, looking at the students. I'm like, what do y'all think? Half the students are like, man, let that guy in. Let's give him a ride. Courtney Shipman, she's like, no. She's the high anxiety one, I think, now. He comes walking back over to the window, and I roll it down again. He's like, what'd the insurance say? I was like, you're good, but you're going to sit right here on these steps. So he comes over. I had Max take up a position in another seat where he could kind of, overwatch the guy so that he could jump on him until I got freed up from driving. I hollered back. I was like, hey, get a bag for this guy. We'll give him some food. So he gets on. He sits down. I was like, hey, you want some food? He's like, yeah. I know why. In just a few minutes, you'll know why, too. He sat down, and I was like, so, man, one thing that guy didn't want to do is he didn't want to get in the van with me because I was going to have a conversation with him. The second thing that was a mistake is when we went through the stoplight, there was a train stopped on the tracks for the next hour. We couldn't back up. We couldn't turn around. So I was like, hey, so what's your story? He's like, well, dude, I'm a proud pothead. I was like, well, go ahead and have some of that food. I said, so when you smoke pot, does it make you feel better? He's like, yeah. I said, but when it goes away, do you still feel bad? He's like, yeah. I said, man, there are times when I feel bad, but guess what? I said, my joy always stays. He's like, what do you smoke? I couldn't tell him, right? The college kids were in the, no, I'm just kidding. I said, man, I have Christ in my heart. And I said, that's what you need. I said, you ever come to a point in your life where you trusted Jesus Christ? He said, man, I'm not religious. I said, boom, 2 in a row. I'm not either. For the next hour, that guy had to listen to me preach the gospel to him. The students in the back were speaking up like, hey, let me tell you something. They were loving on this guy. They were connecting with this guy. His name was Kevin. I learned 2 things that day. One, if you're going to pick somebody up, make sure the train's not coming. And 2, it's very hard to reason with a pothead. Church, we got to have joy. You're not always going to be happy, but you can always have joy. The next characteristic and the final one is mercy. Gandhi once said, the weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is an attribute of the strong. Psalm 51 says this about mercy. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. According to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. Wash away all my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. See, church, mercy is when we get something that we don't deserve. When we get something that we don't deserve. Or when we don't get something that we do deserve. Because everybody in this room, to include me, deserves death and separation from Christ. But because of his mercy, he says that if you'll just trust in me, ask for forgiveness and repent of your sins, I will give you mercy and give you something you don't deserve called eternity with him. That's mercy. That is a DNA code of a hero, to have mercy. Today we honor those that gave the ultimate sacrifice for our country. Because I served in the military, because some of you served in the military, does not qualify us to claim today. See, it's so much bigger than that. Today, the only people that can claim today are the ones that aren't here to claim it. They're the ones that paid the ultimate price in their service to this country. They didn't make it home. Like Nick O'Brien from Mount Holly, North Carolina. I knew his sister well. Nick signed up to go in the Marine Corps, ended up serving in Afghanistan, and was killed with an IED. His mom and dad have never recovered. They go twice a year to Arlington to set his tombstone amongst those other thousands of white tombstones. Those guys paid the ultimate price so that you and I can enjoy the freedom that we do today. However, it started with standing before somebody, raising their hand, and taking an oath. See, that was the beginning of them being a hero. And so today, the beginning of you and I being a hero is to enlist, to accept Christ as our personal Savior. And so if you've never done that, you could be a hero. You could save somebody from a burning car. You could take a bullet for somebody. You could serve in the military and die for your country. But you'll never be a biblical hero until you enlist. 1,354,664 men and women have given their life since the American Revolutionary War in serving our nation. They were sons and daughters. They were brothers and sisters. They were husbands and they were wives. And so today we don't honor those that have served. We honor those that have given. And like me, some of you sitting there today may know names of people that gave their life in combat. May have served with people who gave their life in combat. May have family members that gave their life in combat. And today, that's who we honor. We remember their parents who lost a son, who lost a daughter, who lost a husband, who lost a wife. In the military at 2200 every evening, they sound taps. It is the conclusion of the day. When I was stationed in Atlanta, Georgia with the Marine Corps, I got tasked with an I&I staff that participated in color guards for all the major sports teams around, other different events. But the other thing I got tasked with was a funeral detail team. If I wasn't the guy standing out front saying, aim, fire for the 21-gun salute, I was the guy distance on a hill sounding taps after the gunfire went off right before they folded the flag. Taps was the end of the day, and for a military member lost in combat, it signified the end of their life. And so today, in honor of those that have given their lives, 1,354,664, we're going to sound taps. So would you please stand with me in honoring them and remembering those that have fallen? Father God, today we remember those that have given their lives. God, we are forever thankful that they were willing to be a hero. God, today we remember the families of those that gave their lives. And God, today I pray that you would encourage them, that you would surround them with people to love on them, that as they remember this day and what it represents to them, but they would also remember the memories, the laughter, the good times, and they would hold tight to that. And God, I pray that the qualities that we saw in these heroes that gave their life that we honor today, God, may we be full of them. And God, I pray that as we do that, that it would be honoring and pleasing to you. But we love you and say these things in the precious name of Christ. Amen.